Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be looking at Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, great book.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about habits a lot lately
Mm,
and how they really shape our lives, and I think Clear does a fantastic job of breaking down the science of habit formation and giving us this practical framework for building better habits.
absolutely. And what's great about Clear's approach is that he goes beyond those like surface level tips and tricks. You know,
Yeah.
he really delves into like the psychology behind habit formation.
Yeah.
So we can understand like why we do the things we do and how to change those behaviors that aren't serving us.
Yeah, and he does such a good job of making it feel accessible and applicable to everyday life.
Definitely.
Like, I found myself constantly highlighting passages and thinking, oh, I can use that, or that explains why I do that.
Yeah, totally. I had the same experience. It's like he's reading your mind sometimes.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So let's start with Clear's own story. He shares a pretty powerful experience from his high school years that really shaped his perspective on habits and the power of small changes.
Yeah, that baseball accident was a real turning point for him.
Right. He was hit in the face with a bat and sustained some pretty serious injuries.
It was life-threatening actually.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that serious.
Yeah, he had facial fractures and seizures and
Mhm.
even temporarily lost his sense of smell.
Wow, that's incredible that he even recovered.
Yeah, it was a long and difficult recovery process.
I bet.
But what's so inspiring is that he didn't let this experience break him.
Right.
He used it as fuel
Yeah.
to build himself back up.
Stronger than before.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
this is where he really discovered the power of those 1% improvements.
So instead of aiming for those massive overnight changes, he focused on consistency and those small incremental steps.
Precisely, he realized that even tiny improvements, when compounded over time, could lead to significant results.
Oh, like the snowball effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts small, but it gathers momentum and size as it goes.
And he actually uses that analogy in the book,
He
right?
does, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a vivid image.
Yeah, it's really powerful and it applies to so many areas of life.
Right. So how did Clear actually apply this 1% philosophy to his own recovery?
Well, he basically had to rebuild his strength and skills from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
So he focused on doing just a little bit more each day,
Okay.
whether it was lifting slightly heavier weights or spending a few extra minutes practicing his swing.
So it's like the tortoise and the hare fable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Slow and steady wins the race.
Right. And he eventually made it back to playing baseball, right?
He did. He not only recovered, but went on to play college baseball, which is incredible considering the severity of his injuries.
Wow, that's amazing.
And his experience really solidified his belief in the power of those small, consistent actions.
And I think that's such an encouraging message for all of us.
It is. It's empowering because it means we don't have to make these drastic changes to see results.
Yeah, just those small steps day after day can really add up.
And Claire found inspiration in other examples of this compounding effect too, like the British cycling team.
Oh, right. The team that went from being pretty mediocre to dominating the sport.
Exactly. They were the underdogs for years.
Yeah.
And then they hired this new coach, Dave Brailsford, who brought in this philosophy of marginal gains.
So he's the one who applied this 1% improvement idea to cycling.
Yeah, and he was meticulous about it.
So like what kinds of things did they focus on?
Well, they looked at everything, from the obvious things like training techniques and nutrition
Right.
to these seemingly insignificant details like the type of pillows the athletes slept on
Okay.
and the hand washing techniques they used to prevent infections.
Wow. So he was really looking at every single aspect of their performance.
Every single detail. Because he believed that even those tiny improvements, when added together, would create a significant advantage.
And it clearly worked.
Oh, absolutely. The British cycling team went on to win a ton of Olympic gold medals and Tour de France victories.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible story.
And what's fascinating is how this same principle can be applied to pretty much any area of life.
So it's not just about sports performance, it's about anything we want to improve, whether it's our health, our relationships, our finances.
Exactly. It's about understanding that consistent, small improvements over time can lead to remarkable results.
It's about shifting our focus from those big, audacious goals to the daily habits and routines that will actually get us there.
And that's where Clear's emphasis on systems comes in, which is something we'll delve into next.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to that.
Me too.
We were just talking about systems.
Yeah.
And I think this is where Clear really challenges our conventional thinking about habit formation.
Absolutely. He argues that goals are important for providing direction, but it's the systems we create that actually determine our progress.
So it's not enough to just set a goal. We need to have a system in place to support that goal.
Exactly. And think about it. Achieving a goal is a one-time event,
Right.
right? But it's the system,
Yeah.
the consistent habits that sustain our growth long after that initial goal is reached.
It's like the difference between wanting to lose weight and actually developing healthy eating habits and an exercise routine.
Exactly. The goal is to lose weight, but the
Yes.
system is what allows you to make those sustainable changes.
And I think what's so powerful about focusing on systems is that it takes some of the pressure off. Like instead of feeling overwhelmed by this enormity of the goal, we can break it down into these manageable daily actions.
Exactly. And it becomes less about like willpower or motivation
Right.
and more about just showing up and following the system.
I like that.
Yeah, simplifies things.
So if we're building systems rather than chasing goals, where do we even begin?
Yeah.
How do we design these systems to actually work for us?
That's a great question. And Clear suggests starting with a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing solely on what you want to achieve,
Mm-hmm.
he encourages you to consider who you want to become.
So it's about identity.
Yeah, he calls this developing identity-based habits.
So it's more about being than doing.
In a way, yeah. Our self-image, our beliefs about who we are, profoundly shapes our behavior.
Like if you see yourself as a healthy person,
Right.
you're more likely to make choices that support that identity.
Exactly. And the reverse is true, too. If you see yourself as someone who's lazy or undisciplined.
You're more likely to act in ways that confirm that belief.
Exactly. So Clear argues that one of the most effective ways to change your habits is to start by changing your beliefs about yourself.
So it's like an inside-out approach.
Exactly. You start by focusing on who you want to be, and then you let your actions flow from that identity.
Okay, so how do we actually put this into practice? How do we shift our self-image to align with those desired habits?
Clear gives a great example of an entrepreneur named Brian Clark who struggled with nail biting for years.
Nail biting?
Yeah, he tried all sorts of methods to stop,
I bet.
but nothing worked until he decided to get a manicure.
A manicure.
I know, it sounds simple, right?
Yeah, but how did that help?
Well, it was about changing his self-perception.
Ah.
Once his nails looked well-maintained, he no longer wanted to bite them.
So it wasn't just about stopping a bad habit.
Right.
It was about seeing himself as someone who took care of himself.
Exactly, someone who didn't bite his nails.
That's a really interesting example.
It is.
It makes you realize that sometimes even small changes in our behavior can have a big impact on our self-image.
Absolutely, and Clear argues that this is how lasting change happens.
So it's not just about willpower or discipline.
It's about aligning our actions with our desired identity.
It's about becoming the person we want to be.
Exactly. And that brings us to the next layer of Clear's framework, the habit loop.
Okay, so this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of how habits are formed.
Yeah, he breaks it down into 4 stages.
Mm-hmm.
Cue, craving, response, and reward.
So this is the cycle that drives our habit.
Exactly. And understanding this loop is crucial for both building good habits and breaking bad ones.
Let's break that down, starting with the cue. What exactly is a cue in the context of habit formation?
A cue is basically a trigger.
Okay.
It's a signal that initiates the entire habit cycle.
So it's like the starting pistol for the habit.
Exactly. And it can be anything, really.
Mm-hmm.
A specific time of day,
Mm-hmm.
a location, an emotional state, or even another preceding habit.
So for example, if you always check your phone first thing in the morning,
Right.
the act of waking up becomes the cue that triggers that habit.
Exactly. The cue sets the stage for the craving, which is the second stage of the loop.
Okay, so what is the craving? Is it just a desire for the habit itself?
Not quite. The craving isn't for the action itself,
Mm-hmm.
but for the change in state that the habit delivers.
So it's more about the feeling or outcome we associate with the habit.
Exactly. We don't crave smoking a cigarette. We crave the feeling of relaxation or stress relief that it provides.
Right. So it's the emotional or physical state we're seeking.
Exactly. And that craving is what drives us to take action, which brings us to the third stage of the loop, the
Yeah.
response.
Okay, so this is the actual habit itself.
Right. It's the behavior we engage in as a result of the cue and the craving.
So, for example, if the cue is feeling bored and the craving is for entertainment,
Right.
the response might be scrolling through social media.
Exactly. And then comes the reward, the final stage of the loop.
Okay, this is what reinforces the habit and makes us want to repeat it, right?
Precisely. The reward is the satisfying feeling or outcome that we get from engaging in the habit.
So in the example of scrolling through social media, the reward might be the feeling of connection or distraction that it provides.
Right. And that reward strengthens the connection between the cue, the craving, and the response, making it more likely that we'll repeat the cycle in the future.
So the habit loop is like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Exactly. And understanding this cycle is crucial because it gives us a framework for analyzing our existing habits
Okay.
and designing new ones.
So how can we use this understanding to actually start building better habits?
Well, that's where Clear's strategies for habit formation come in.
And that's what we'll explore next.
Exactly. We'll delve into his insights on how to make good habits easier to adopt and bad habits harder to maintain.
Sounds good. I'm eager to hear more.
Me too. It's fascinating stuff.
So we've talked about starting new habits and making them attractive and, all those things.
Right.
But how do we actually make them stick? How do we keep that momentum going, especially when those inevitable plateaus hit?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Right. It's one thing to start a new habit all gung-ho, but then life happens and,
Listen, totally. It's easy to get sidetracked.
Exactly. So what does Clear say about this?
Well, he actually emphasizes the importance of tracking your progress.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It might seem like a simple thing, but visually seeing those consistent efforts can be really motivating, keeps you accountable.
Oh, for sure. I've used habit trackers before, and there is something so satisfying about checking off those boxes each day and seeing that streak grow.
Right. It just feels good. And Clear gives a great example of this in the book. He talks about this stockbroker named Trent Deersmid.
Okay. What did he do?
So every morning, he would start his day with 2 jars on his desk.
Okay. 2 jars. What was in them?
One jar was filled with 120 paper clips, and the other was empty.
Okay. Why 120 paper clips?
Each paper clip represented a sales call.
Ah, okay.
So after each call, he would move one paper clip from the full jar to the empty jar. And his goal was to empty that first jar by the end of the day.
So it's like a visual representation of his progress. I
Yeah.
like that. So simple but effective.
Yeah, exactly. No ambiguity, just a clear measure of his effort.
And that sense of progress, no matter how small, can really keep you motivated.
For sure. And it plays into that whole idea of immediate rewards that we talked about earlier.
Right, because you get that little dopamine hit each time you move that paper clip.
Exactly. And it just reinforces that habit loop, making it more likely that you'll stick with it. But Clear also talks about another important strategy, accountability.
Ah, yeah. That's a big one. Sometimes we need that external push to keep us going.
For sure.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to breaking bad habits.
Because it's easy to let things slide when you're the only one holding yourself accountable.
Exactly. So Clear suggests using something called a habit contract.
Okay, a contract. Tell me more about that.
It's basically where you write down your commitment to a specific habit
Okay.
and the consequences for not following through.
So it's like having a binding agreement with yourself.
Yeah. And you find 1 or 2 people to be your accountability partners, and they sign it too.
So it's like putting some skin in the game, making the stakes a little higher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can be surprisingly effective because now you're not just letting yourself down if you break the habit, you're also letting down the people you've made this commitment to.
Right. There's that added social pressure.
Yeah. And Clear shares this example in the book of a guy who wanted to lose weight, and he created this habit contract with his wife and his personal trainer.
Oh, wow.
And if he didn't stick to his workout schedule or his diet, he had to pay them a certain amount of money.
Ouch. That's serious commitment.
Yeah, it was. But it worked. He ended up reaching his goals and getting in the best shape of his life.
That's awesome. I might have to try that myself. Though maybe not with the financial penalties. I'm not sure my wife would be too happy about that.
Well, it doesn't have to be that intense. It could be something simple like agreeing to text a friend every day when you complete your workout.
Yeah, or just having someone check in with you regularly to see how you're doing.
Exactly. The point is to leverage that social support to help you stay motivated. Because we're more likely to follow through on our commitments when we know other people are watching. But beyond just sticking with habits, Clear also talks about the importance of choosing the right habits in the first place.
Right, because not all habits are created equal.
Exactly. He has this whole section in the book about the relationship between talent and habits.
Okay, so how do those two things connect?
Well, he argues that we all have these natural inclinations, certain things that we're just naturally good at.
Okay.
And when we choose habits that align with those talents,
Mm-hmm.
it's much easier to make them stick. Because it's almost like we're working with the grain, not against it.
That makes sense. So it's not just about working harder, it's about working smarter.
Exactly. And he uses the example of Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer.
Oh, right. Didn't he have like a crazy wingspan or something?
Yeah, and bigger feet,
Mm.
which gave him this huge advantage in the pool.
So it's like those physical attributes naturally propelled him towards success in swimming.
Exactly. And Clear says that while our genes don't eliminate the need for hard work, they clarify it.
So it's about understanding our strengths
Right.
and choosing habits that leverage those natural abilities.
Exactly. It's about finding the things that come easily to you, the habits that feel almost effortless to maintain, because those are the ones that you're most likely to stick with long term.
It's like choosing your battles wisely.
Exactly. But even when you've chosen the right habits and you're tracking your progress and you've got that accountability in place, it's still possible to hit those plateaus.
Oh, absolutely. I've definitely experienced that feeling of a habit becoming too routine, too mundane.
And Clear actually addresses this. He says the biggest threat to success is not failure, but boredom.
Because it's easy to lose motivation when a habit starts to feel stale.
Totally. So he recommends following what he calls the Goldilocks rule.
The Goldilocks rule, I like that. Not too hard, not too easy, but just right.
Precisely. It's about finding those tasks that are slightly outside of your comfort zone, that push you to grow without being overwhelming.
And that's when we experience the flow state, right?
Exactly. Where you're totally absorbed in what you're doing and time just seems to fly by.
Ah, yes. Those are the good times.
They are. And lastly, I think it's important to remember that building better habits is an ongoing process.
Right. It's not about setting it and forgetting it.
Yeah, it's about continuously reflecting and refining your approach.
So it's like checking in with yourself regularly
Mhm.
to make sure those habits are still serving you and making adjustments as needed.
Exactly. Clear actually encourages us to regularly ask ourselves 3 questions.
Okay, what are they?
What went well this week? What didn't go so well? And what did I learn?
I love that. It's so simple but so powerful.
Yeah, it's about making those small course corrections along the way to ensure that you're continuously moving in the right direction.
Well, I think this has been a really insightful deep dive into atomic habits. I know I've learned a lot. What
Right.
about you?
Well, me too. And I think the most important takeaway is that even the smallest changes, when practiced consistently, can really make a difference over time.
Yeah. It's about embracing those 1% improvements and building systems that support our growth.
Exactly. And on that note, I'll leave our listeners with one final thought. What is one tiny habit, one small thing that you can start today that aligns with your desired identity?
It doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be anything dramatic, but what's one tiny step that you can take today that could have a positive ripple effect on your life in the long run?
That's a great question to reflect on.
It is. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it valuable, and until next time, keep making those small efforts, day after day. Remember, even tiny changes can lead to extraordinary results.
Absolutely.